Welcome all to another episode of Share a Slice. This week, I've got an interesting conversation with journalist, author, blogger, and podcaster Richard McColl. He's originally from the UK, but now he lives in Bogota, Colombia, where he runs a stunningly beautiful guest house, La Casa Amarilla. Without further ado, let's talk to Richard. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure.
So, Richard, I guess let's get started. I mean, you weren't always in Colombia. You were born in the UK. Can you tell me a little bit about what brought you to Colombia in the first place?
Yes, of course. Well, I was born in the UK, and my formative, let's say, education was all in the UK. And I come from a fairly nomadic family. My father had lived almost a decade in Brazil. My mother had hitchhiked in Mexico in the 60s when she was like 18. I guess a sort of natural progression. I did a year abroad in Guatemala when I was at university and was really bitten by this South America or Latin America bug. I mean, I just couldn't get enough, and then started studying intensely, and then ended up traveling the whole region over 2 years, more or less, and then falling into a master's in journalism back in London. And I realized I didn't want to be in London, and then I ended up, again, I sort of fall into jobs. I fell into a job being a social projects coordinator and a freelance journalist and expedition guide. And I was originally working in Peru and Ecuador, sometimes in Bolivia, a little bit in Chile, and then in Brazil. And that's, when I sort of came to the end, I was like, yeah, no more. I'm tired. That's like 4 years after doing this, of living out of a bag and doing 3 to 6 month contracts here and there across South America. But you get tired, you know?
Yeah, I can only imagine. So you settled down. Actually, I probably can't imagine. I actually don't travel too well myself. So you settled down in Bogota, Colombia,
in Bogota.
Correct?
Yes, Bogota, Colombia. Yes. Well, it's after about the 4 years of working in this sort of nomadic experience. It was 2006 in Brazil, and I was working in the northeast in a region called Bahia, very beautiful region of Brazil, known for more of its heritage of the former black slaves, but wonderful beaches and jungles and scenery. And as it happened, I'd caught malaria in the Amazon, but then had been moved down to Bahia to work, and I'd got hemorrhagic dengue there. Ooh. So I was laid out with both of these diseases in a public hospital in rural Brazil, and that's when, I survived, because I'm here to tell you the story. I almost didn't survive. I almost didn't live to see 30. And I said, I just can't do this anymore. And, after some deep, let's say, soul searching, I decided to move to Colombia, which was incidentally the country that my father had made me promise not to go to.
Exactly. Well, that might have formed some sort of part of it. Who knows?
Yes, I think I'm just, I think I'm a rebel at heart, but not rebellious, but a rebel at heart without knowing it.
Dengue and malaria are no joke. I actually have a friend who caught malaria, and let's just say that he always was struggling with weight before he caught malaria. And after he was done with malaria, he was very thin. Like it's really no joke. You got to get your shots.
I fell to 50 kilos when I was in that period of my life. I was emaciated, but it was because of both illnesses. And, I was on the drugs for malaria. I was on the anti-malarials, but they're not 100% effective. And if you're working in the Amazon, you're at greater risk.
All I know is that, I'm a little freaked out about going to certain places. I do some charity work, I guess by proxy, with a school, a humanist school in Uganda. And frankly, I've read stories about worms that kind of bore them way through your feet and go up to your brain. Did you get the worms?
I've had a worm in my foot. It came from cow feces
Oh,
near to a beach in a place called Sao Luis, and there was this, it's a place called Jericoacoara, which is now becoming very, very fashionable and chic. And this was some years ago though, and it did say, oh, there are problems with these worms, and of course but you're at a beach place, so
yeah.
you're
I mean,
always barefoot. And I was sitting on one night I felt like I'd been bitten by a mosquito on the
oh
underside of my
God.
foot, and I was like,
Yeah.
this is strange because, why would they bite the underside? I mean, it's the toughest part and everything. And I thought nothing about it. And then about a week later, I started to see, I was sort of inspecting because it was itching at night. And so I took the flashlight to it and saw that this line, a red line, followed the underside from where the bite was. And it had now come over to the sort of roof of my foot.
Oh,
And,
is this the worm or is this where it burrowed?
the worm and where it burrowed.
Oh.
And it was underneath
Oh,
the
we're
skin.
going to have to change the topic really soon.
It was really horrible. But and so I went to the doctor. I'll quickly get this out. I went to the doctor and I said, well, I've got this. And they went, you've got this, this. And they just wrote me out a prescription. And I just thought it'd be some drugs to kill it. Oh, the prescription included a razor blade, a pumice stone, and some cream. I had to cut it out.
Oh, wow. They gave that to you. Oh, that's
Yes.
good. Here, figure this out. Oh, that's great. Let's do it yourself.
Yeah, so I sat on the balcony of my hostel then and lifted my foot up onto the railing and cut it. Fortunately, it wasn't too deep.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, even though it gives me the heebie-jeebies, like big time, I mean, if I were in the same situation, I'd be like, okay, this bugger's going to get out of my foot right now. I mean, you're kind of left between a rock and a hard place,
Yeah. That's it. It's like you do it or you do it. Otherwise, it will continue and it can go to your joints, and then that can create some sort of paralysis. And it's out. It needs to be out.
Wow. I mean, okay, so let's get to something a little more palatable to some of the listeners.
A bit more cheery.
Yeah. So you went to Colombia and you started is it a hotel or is it a guest house, or what do you have there?
Yeah. This is in a small town called Mompos, which is about 5 or 6 hours inland from the Colombian Caribbean coast. So you follow this famous river, which is the Magdalena River, down from the north coast inland. It's a colonial town, originally built in the 16th century, pretty much. I got there in 2007 during supposedly high season for tourism, and there were only 2 foreigners. All the tourists were nationals. I ended up buying this house because it was just too cheap. A house which dates back to the very end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century. And I didn't really know what to do with it. So I thought, well, if I can do some, let's say, some superficial restorations and open it as a hostel. Because people looking for hostels aren't looking for the top end stuff. But then over the years, I've just kept on renovating and keeping in line with the authentic architecture of the colonial period. It's now a hotel. We've got 10 rooms. All rooms are fully equipped with their Wi-Fi and cable TV and air conditioning and everything that you possibly want. It's small. It's easy to manage. I'm hardly ever there now, which is the best way to be when you've got a business, I think. I've got a great local team who run everything, and it's all through local providers and everything else. We started it with the aim of creating an economic stimulus in a town that was really, let's say, not even in the first or second wave of areas to visit in Colombia. So we were sort of pushing the envelope a little bit, and most people thought me and my wife, who's Colombian, we were kind of mental and doing it, but it's paid off. And 8 years later, we have a roaring success story on our hands.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I guess the next time I go down to Colombia, not that I've ever been to Colombia, I would consider going there. Yeah, definitely. And this is sort of like it's not one of the main cities of Colombia. It's sort of off the beaten path a little bit.
In the 8 years that we've been working, the roads have been paved, the bridges have been built. There's no security issue. You're not going through a guerrilla area or a paramilitary area. There is a long-running conflict that's hopefully going to come to an end quite soon in Colombia. Let's say soon, because it's been going on for 50 years. So if it comes to an end in the next couple of years, that's soon when we talk about these periods of time. but you're not going through any conflict areas. It's just about Colombia really lacked infrastructure. Really lacked it. And that was largely in part due to this conflict which has strafed the country. But this town has never really been at risk. It's just been forgotten. It's a backwater. You've got the main areas to visit in Colombia. The main cities would be Bogota and Medellin, Cartagena on the Colombian coast. But for those people who are looking for a little bit more adventure and getting out there a bit more and seeing something more authentic, then it's highly recommended. We were mentioned in the New York Times, so that was a really big coup for us.
Wow, that's great. And so you run the hotel, and also you have this podcast.
Yes.
And it's called Colombia Calling. And you got this podcast with, what is it called? Overseas Radio, is that it?
Yeah, Overseas Radio Network. I was interviewed on a different show on that platform, on the Overseas Radio Network. I guess it was over 2 years ago. I think it was like someone who was running an expat radio show just found me, I guess, through the ether and said, "Can I interview you?" And then they said, the guy said, "Well, listen, we've stopped the interview now, and my editor's on the line, and he wants to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, fine. I'll talk to anyone." And the editor is bizarrely in Costa Rica, because you can be location independent with all of these types of jobs. And he said, "We're looking for someone to host a show in Colombia. Would you be interested?" Now, I have a background in journalism, but nothing with radio. So I was fascinated, and well, we've now run Colombia Calling has been going since it's more than 2 years now. I'm on to 136 episodes. Just one gone out today about the new marathon that will take place in Colombia in 2017. But it's fun. But as you know, it's also hard to find the right people week in, week out to interview.
Tell me about
it. and you get people who are saying, "Well, I'd love to be interviewed," and then you put them in front of a microphone and they freeze. And you're like, well.
The thing about the podcast, I think, that struck me is that when I first saw the iTunes listing on it, I thought, oh, this would be sort of like a travel podcast or something. Mm-hmm. But then when I actually listened to it, I realized that, for instance, the last episode was about the situation with prisons in the country, and it's not really a travel show. It's more of like I guess sort of a journal or a magazine about the country itself.
Well, I thank you for that, because I've been trying to move away from the travel element of it, because it would be too easy for me to sort of fall into the trap of getting one after another sort of travel blogger on. But then how much new information could we possibly share? And Colombia is a country that is so unknown. It really is. I mean, it's been cut off really from the outside world due to its politics and due to the conflict. I really wanted to do something different and to be able to inform. And so I do get a huge following from the Colombian diaspora. So I get emails from like Colombians living in Edmonton, Alberta, up there, and saying, and then Fort McMurray, and saying, "Oh, this is although it's in English, this is my connection to the country. You're talking about transitional justice in Colombia, or you're talking about maybe the prison system." They love to hear about foreigners or expats doing great things, but they also want to know a little bit more beyond what is in the mainstream press, which tends to be so very negative. And that's not to say I don't focus on some negative things. I mean, we've had an interviewee who was an Englishman who was kidnapped and held for over a year near to the Darien Gap between Panama and Colombia. And we've had the prison story, and I've done other things and security issues, but these are things that people want to hear about maybe before visiting as well. So I try and cover a lot of ground. And of course, as you say, as we were just mentioning, sometimes it's not so easy to always get the people you want, and sometimes you just have to take what's available.
Yeah.
So I do jump around a lot with the themes, but I just try and keep it interesting, like a good chat.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of good chats, let's go back to some of your freewheeling days. So did you have any interesting run-ins? I mean, other than things burrowing into your foot, any exciting bus rides or hold-ups or mayhem?
There's always grounds for mayhem, and I think maybe more so in the past than today. I mean, I started backpacking when we didn't use the internet and we didn't book hotels or anything. You just turned up in places where actually the guidebooks, really were your guides. I mean, that was it, and that seems so long ago. But today, people text you and WhatsApp you and whatever with reservations, so but run-ins I've had many. I'm perhaps some that cannot be shared here and some that may be shared. I mean, what was it? I've been threatened with being jailed on the Costa Rica-Panama border. I got sent away from the Ecuadorian border with Peru for not looking like my passport photo once, and they sent me away to go and shave. Oh. And I came back, and
then
the border official wasn't there.
Oh, drat!
It's like I had again, before hipsters had hipster beards, I had this huge, I looked like Castaway, and then he sent me away to shave. But the one in between Costa Rica and Panama was. They lined us all up in a like a pavilion, a huge like warehouse as we were crossing, and we had to open our bags so that the sniffer dogs could come through. And I forgot that I had some sort of meat pies in my bag, and that was my lunch after the 12-hour journey on this bus, from San Jose, Costa Rica down to David, Panama. And the dog went mental and it lunged its head and shoulders into my bag.
Did they think it was drugs or something?
And yeah, they thought it was drugs because they'd seen the dog going as crazy as that. And of course, you're in front of all your fellow passengers as well. And I'm the only gringo there, and you can feel yourself being judged. This silent judgment. Oh, the gringo.
He thinks that he can get across with drugs because he's a white.
Yeah, and all of this sort of stuff. Anyway, the dog then. This Alsatian withdraws its head, and it's got all this sort of ground beef around its mouth and stuff. It's like, that was my lunch. And of course, everyone's laughing, but they don't replace your lunch,
I'll just interpose, although I'm sure these are real meat pies, that, a tour de force, of course, would be to put the drugs inside the meat pies. Because then they would say, oh, it's only meat pies. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know. These dogs are pretty well trained, I have to say. The ones we've seen around here. There've been, scrapes. There've been many, I have to say. I've been in car accidents. I've been in volcanic eruptions, earthquakes.
Whoa! Volcanic eruptions. No, that's something I haven't experienced. Guatemala. Okay. So they had an eruption, and you happened to be in town.
Well, I was living in Guate in the capital city, but it was around the time of it was 1998, so a long time ago now. The volcano erupted on my birthday, and I was working at the international school there. This way back then when I considered teaching for a while, and school was cancelled because everything had 2 inches of ash on it. All the cars, the roads. I mean,
there you go.
I know. Days previously, we'd seen the windows bend inwards with the earth tremor that was going on and the earthquake. I mean, these countries that live on this sort of ring of fire. And that was also the year of Hurricane Mitch as well.
So there was that destruction as well.
That destruction as well when we were stuck in our houses for several days. Of course, we were in a nice area of town with food and everything, not like the people who really suffered out in the countryside. But in 1 year, earthquakes, volcanoes, and hurricanes.
That is quite a bit of mayhem. I mean, it kind of makes me wonder. Here in Canada, we don't generally have volcanoes. No. We have wimpy earthquakes, right? We don't have hurricanes. As of yet, right? And we don't have giant bugs. Like when my wife, her family comes from Barbados. So I go to Barbados every once in a while. And they live in St. Lucie, which is the very north part of Barbados. And there are centipedes so large there that you have to take a hatchet and actually chop the centipedes up into little pieces. And I mean, no joke. Like I saw in the old house we were at, because we were staying at her father's house, which was partially abandoned. Yeah. We actually saw a rat and a centipede like go at it, like literally have a battle. Right? That's crazy. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, sort of like, the obstacles, to I guess what we would consider Western civilization in which includes the Americas, in some of these South American countries versus Canada, where basically like you don't have as much stuff trying to kill you, it seems, or things acting against you. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm at the moment, you're speaking to me here in Bogota, and we're 2.5 kilometers above sea level, 2,600 meters. So up at this height, we really don't have those
I
those
guess you're right.
critters.
Is it drier up there? Like,
Yeah,
is it? Yeah.
it's drier, and the oxygen's thin. But when you're down in the lowlands, there's any number of creepy crawlies that are after you. I don't think about it anymore. I've been down here quite some time. I really don't think about it.
Do Colombians go camping for sport? Because I would be scared crapless if I tried to go with all that stuff. I mean, I guess there's bears in Canada and parts of Canada, but
well, you say that my uncle was almost killed by a moose driving around the northern end of the Great Lakes, wasn't it? So years ago. I've been camping out in jungle areas where there's nothing, in just a hammock and a mosquito net. And we woke up because we knew there were 4 of us there. We knew something was coming through the camp. We didn't know what it was. And in the morning, we figured it must have been like a wild boar type thing. But the small critters I don't really even think of. I'm not lifting up rocks and trying to look for them.
I would be kicking my boots every morning. And,
for scorpions and things. But you do that. I mean, you just get into the habit of that. Those are things that you don't think about. It's kind of like, they're there.
I don't know if you've ever been to northern Canada, but the mosquitoes up there are obscene. I mean, you can actually feel the blood being drained from your body. I don't know what it's like in when you're in the Amazon.
You know what? I've always considered that it's probably worse in northern Canada, in truth, because I've seen, footage of this, and I was almost sent to work one summer when I was a young student. My father was from Winnipeg, and so he always thought that I needed to be toughened up, I think. He was going to send me up to the up north in Saskatchewan to help clear brush for a diamond mine way back. And that, he's passed on, but he's of a generation that they went up, on mules up into the northwestern territories to scope for oil and so on and so forth. So, those stories have kind of stuck with me about the clouds of mosquitoes that you get up there. Okay, you can get mosquitoes in the Amazon and so on. It's nothing like that, though, at all. It's nothing like this sort of dense mist descending upon you, which is the image I get from northern Canada.
Maybe it's because you're the only thing in miles. So every mosquito just zooms in on you.
Every single one homes in. It's very possible. It's very possible indeed. I think if you're down in the southern plains, where this meets the Colombian plains meet the Amazon, I'm sure there's plenty of mosquitoes. We've been having real troubles this last year, the last 6 months, with the 2 sort of newish, or at least they're new now in the public conscience, mosquito-borne diseases, the chikungunya and Zika. So
Zika, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's we have our mosquitoes, but I've never experienced anything that I could possibly envision being similar to those of northern Canada.
In Colombia, I mean, do you have any major festivals coming up and any fun ones coming up that you can think of? Do you guys have anything sort of like Carnival over there?
Oh, yes. Well, Carnival is the second biggest carnival in South America is in Barranquilla, Colombia. So behind that of Rio and in Brazil, it's now, what do they call it? An intangible World Heritage Carnival, so it can't be changed. UNESCO has got together to protect it so that it's true to its folklore. So it's all about the different pre-Columbian, so prior to the Hispanic arrival, the dances, the African dances, the Amerindian dances, and that's in Barranquilla at the same time as Carnival. Because of course Carnival the same period all the year round. So that's a huge Carnival in the big city on the coast. I think there's a fiesta or a feria or some kind of party every single day of the year here in Colombia. We really are. This country knows how to party. I mean, you could pretty much, I think, follow a calendar of events. Now, Easter is a huge celebration, of course, with the Semana Santa processions, but you can go to smaller towns, let's say more intermediary towns, where you'd get involved in the fiesta. The people would sort of, I think, embrace you and swallow you up into the whole party spirit, because they're so happy to see foreigners coming. You could go to the Festival de San Pacho in Quibdó, which is a city that's hardly ever visited. I think if you were there, and it's all sort of African music from the descendants of the former freed or escaped African slaves. I mean, there's something for every day here in Colombia. In truth, I haven't been to nearly enough, but my footloose and fancy-free days have been numbered ever since getting married and having a kid.
Speaking Bogota, but also Colombia as well. I mean, is there a signature dish? Is there like a meal that you are most fond of?
But because Colombia's like several countries in one, right? Because we've got the Andean, we've got the Amazonian, then there's a Caribbean side and the Pacific side. So there's all sorts of different dishes for each region. And that's what makes traveling to Colombia so exciting, is that you really do feel like you're changing country between area. If you're up on the north coast in Cartagena, your dish will mainly be seafood based, a good red snapper with some coconut rice, plantains. That's a very Caribbean style. But if you're in the interior, where we are now, up at 2,600 meters up in Bogota, you've got things like the ajiaco. Now, the ajiaco is the traditional soup because the nights here are chilly. You know, we're up this high; it gets a little bit cold. Not cold. I'm not talking Canada cold, but chilly for us. And you guys would be around in shorts and flip flops here, but it's chilly. But these hearty soups made with 3 different types of potato, an indigenous herb to the region called huasca, and then they mix in a shredded chicken breast and corn, and they put capers and sour cream on top. And I tell you, it's such a good meal that after having that at lunch, you need a siesta, and then you won't eat again for the rest of the day.
That sounds delicious.
It's really good.
I guess when I thought about Colombia, I never really considered, I mean, it makes sense if you think about it, the Caribbean, it makes sense, but I never made that link before in my head, of being there being a Caribbean side of Colombia.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's a long, and it extends all the way from the Panamanian border all the way along to Venezuela. And when you get up to that north easterly point with Venezuela, that's a whole desert area as well. I mean, within Colombia, we have the highest mountain range. It's a solo standing mountain range on the Caribbean coast. So you can be on the beach and look behind you and see snow. Then we've got jungles up there. We've got deserts. We've got the Andes Mountains. We've got savannas towards the east with Venezuela, Amazon jungle. I mean, you've got a bit of everything.
Can you tell me a little bit about any projects you might have going on that you're working on currently?
Absolutely, Sean. Well, I'm quite busy. Aside from the Colombia Calling podcast, which I do every week, and trying to build on that and create it bigger and better all the time. I have my own blog, which is richardmccall.com. Last year, exactly a year ago, I co-edited and co-authored a book called Was Gabo, an Irishman, Tales from Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Colombia, which is available on Amazon. It's doing very well. I'm also working, at the moment, I've just started this year a PhD at university here, in addition to reporting for the international press on the peace dialogues that are going on. So you can see my writing usually in quite a lot of the mainstream press, if you just Google my name, but I'm always working. And on the back burner, I have finished the first draft of a book about my experiences opening up a hotel in the middle of nowhere, Colombia. So hopefully this year I'll be able to get to go through it again and find a publisher.
I'm hoping it's not as goofy as Faulty Towers, or although maybe it is. Maybe it'd be kind of fun.
We have Faulty Towers moments. There's no doubt about it. I mean, yes, I do become the irate English landlord, at some points. But I stop short of mimicking the goose-stepping Germans across the kitchen, as that's to say.
Yes. That would be the episode. I believe it's called The Germans.
Yes, that's right. But I have had
one of my favorites.
Yes.
Listen, Richard, thanks so much for being on the show. And you're totally welcome to come back later. I think we can have more interesting discussions.
Excellent. It'll be a real pleasure. I would love to come back at a later date.
Well, I hope you enjoy the conversation with Richard. Remember, you can learn more about him at his website, richardmccall.com. Also, please visit shareaslicepodcast.com. That's where you can listen to all the previous episodes and subscribe on iTunes and Android devices as well. All music is by Chromatics, Kromatiks, and is used with permission. You can find them over on SoundCloud and Facebook too. Thanks so much for listening.